Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ray, and welcome to the RayWenderlich.com podcast. In this podcast, we'll keep you up to date with the latest app development tech talk. Now, here are your hosts, Dru Freeman and Alex Sullivan.
Thanks, Ray. This is the Ray Wenderlich podcast. Welcome to episode 2 for season 10. Now, this episode was recorded on Tuesday, the 25th of February, for release on the 11th of March, 2020. This episode is sponsored by the language Algol and by any four-dimensional transformation matrix. I'm Dru Freeman here with my trial by fire co-host, Alex Sullivan.
Thanks, Dru. This show, we bring back Season 9 co-host and Ray Wenderlich contributor, Jenn Bailey. Jenn is a freelance Android and iOS developer, as well as a full-time computer science professor for Ames Community College in Colorado, where she teaches a certificate in mobile app development, including Android and iOS platforms. She also teaches courses in Python, Java, C++, and a certificate for development in the .NET platform, utilizing C#. Wow.
An underachiever here. On this episode, Jenn will be talking to us about the different ways to save data on Android, and then later, Alex will explain to us his excavation of KTor, or at least dipping his toe in. Jenn, welcome back to the show. It feels like it's been only 3 or 4 episodes.
Yay! It's great to be back. It's awesome to have a reunion.
Yay! It's what better way to spend our 10th anniversary with the podcast and to start bringing back some familiar old faces or young faces.
Oh, thank you very much.
So we talked a lot last season about you at the community college, where you've now, how long have you been teaching at Ames?
This is my 9th year, so at the end of this year, I'll be full professor.
Ooh, wow, that's congratulations.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Okay, so the obvious question, well, we've talked about you teaching and talked about you dealing with students in a lot of the episodes last season, but talk to me about what you do when you're not coding.
Oh my goodness, is there anything but coding to do?
I get that a lot on the show. I really do, but there's...
I do actually have some hobbies. So I like to be active in the community. So it's related to coding, but I run the local GDG chapter, and I do some meetups with that. I also, when it's not technology related, I like to rollerblade. I have 4 pets, so 2 cats and 2 dogs. And my family, I grew up on a farm, so my family has horses, and my daughter likes to train horses, and I have a little horse, so sometimes we go horseback riding out on the trails. And Colorado's so beautiful, so there's a lot of hiking and outdoors opportunities when I leave the computer.
You're near Denver, which means there's a lot of beauty, but not a lot of air.
Yeah, that is true. It is definitely the mile-high city, so you can feel winded. I love going to sea level because I feel like I'm in a mega shape. I can practically sea level.
That's cool. Can you actually tell the difference?
Oh, it's day and night. I feel invincible when I go to sea level. Yeah.
Oh, that is so cool. So you kind of have a little superpower from living high up.
I know a lot of the people who do parkour and a lot of that like American Ninja stuff are now training in Denver so that they can do it with the lack of air. And then when they come down to Vegas to compete, it's just like they're monsters.
That would make sense. And I think it helps our sports teams. I think it helps the local football team when we have home games. The other teams struggle here a little bit with the altitude.
What an unfair advantage.
It totally is, because after about 2 or 3 weeks, your body adjusts and you start to feel semi-normal.
If I remember correctly, there was one of the, I think Pittsburgh Steelers was not allowed to compete in Denver because of the fact that he had some rare blood disease that would cause a problem if he got overexerted in the... I could be wrong on all of this, but I vaguely remember a story on that.
I haven't heard the story, but I've definitely heard of people oftentimes move away from the area because it can cause a myriad of health problems if you're sensitive to the low oxygen. So Especially as people age, sometimes they like to move closer to sea level.
So I want to back up. We've talked about GDG a lot on the show when you were co-hosting, but I want to take a moment and give you a chance to explain what GDG is for some of the newer Android developers who may not be familiar.
Great. So Google Developer Group is a volunteer-run developer group. Google oftentimes will sponsor campaigns, or basically we take their code labs and their documentation and we teach it to the community for free. And we'll put on meetups through meetup.com where we can have dev fests or holiday parties. I'll get little prizes, and we'll have kind of a hackathon where people code for a day, present their idea, their proof of concept, and then we have judging and people can win the prizes, which is usually Google technology of whatever is the latest, like the Google Home Assistant stuff. So that's really fun. Yeah, and mainly anything Google related. So they will also sometimes provide speakers, or you can be a speaker if you have a talk. And so it's just a really fun way to interface with Google for volunteers, that you don't actually have to be a Google engineer to play with their technology and be part of the community.
That's cool. Is it mostly Android focused, or is it all different Google products?
It's all different Google products, and I like to focus my meetups on Android, but I've done quite a few on Google Assistant. Right now there's a Firebase campaign going on. So it's everything Google, and anything that can fall under the umbrella. You could have local experts in your area come and do a talk at the meetup. I do that a lot. Sometimes I just do strictly socializing meetups where code and coffee sort of thing, where if you're a developer, come code with us. We'll talk code with Google technology and talk about it. And so it's just a fun way. It's also a good point of contact. So if you want to learn more about Google technology, your local GDG leads are a good way to get connected. So we can tell you who's a developer advocate in the area. And sometimes we know people through the community that have certain expertise.
And this is sponsored by Google as a whole. They contribute and help with this program?
I believe so, yeah. So I don't know if if sponsoring is the right word, but they do definitely, I don't know if the funds come from Google, but they allocate certain funds for certain campaigns, and you can apply. Say I want to do a meetup about Firebase, and you can apply. Sometimes they'll provide a bit of funding so that you can put on a good meetup, which is it's really neat when they do that.
See, now the Apple person in me, I'm jealous.
Yeah, and you'd be really jealous because if you, they have a global summit and a North American summit where all the GDG leaders get together. If you go to the global summit right before Google I/O, you get a special seating section sometimes in the past. Ooh. So it's really fun because then you meet these GDG leads from all around the world. So I'm one of a few people from Colorado, and you just meet people from every country and do training, professional development training about how to run your group with all these multilingual people in the global community. And that's really a fun experience.
And you wound up going to Google I/O last year. And
last year I was lucky. Yes, and I hope I get to go again. So I love to go to the Google I/O conference.
Is there anything else that you wish you had time for if it weren't for all the code and the teaching and everything else? Or are you very happy with everything?
I would love to have some more time for video games.
Wouldn't we all?
So I'm so dated in my video game repertoire that I can't strafe good. And I think the online games with the communities nowadays look like so much fun. So I'd love to do more of that. And I like to do arts and crafts sometimes too. So it might be fun to make crafts, quilting, and that sounds maybe a little too old for my age bracket, but I think I don't
know. I figure rollerblading and quilting, there's a combination for you.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, I could try to do that at the same time. And I do rollerblade with my 2 dogs, and that's kind of like having a sled dog team because they can.
That sounds amazing.
So what is the video game of choice right now if you get the chance?
Oh my goodness. I am hopelessly addicted to the Fallout Shelter app. And then when I play games, my daughter and I like a cooking game. I can't remember what it's called, but I mostly play games on my phone. So I get hopelessly addicted to Plants vs. Zombies and Fallout Shelter. I love puzzle solving games. I used to really like Mario games on the Wii. The 3D Mario game was really fun.
Do you have a Switch?
I don't. So I had the old style Wii. I do have a PlayStation 4, I believe. And so Grand Theft Auto's right up there.
I like that. Mario and Grand Theft Auto.
And quilting.
And quilting.
So I just like all different kinds of activities. I think I like to try new things. Oh, and cooking. I like to cook a lot. Not that I'm good at it, but I enjoy it. And I put on a convincing performance. So it looks like I know how to cook, sort of.
I empathize with that a lot. I like to occasionally, sprinkle in a little bit of salt, even though I haven't tasted it, and I'll be like, a touch will do now.
There's the daring.
No idea what I'm doing.
There's the mad scientist. I think I'll put in a pinch of salt.
A dash of oregano in this. Could be good.
Be still. Oh, such craziness.
Really get wild on Friday nights.
Well, let us get wild then with the idea. There's no graceful transition there.
Now segue.
And now we will segue. So let's talk about files in Android.
Great. Okay. So I don't know. I've recently been an author on this lovely book.
This is right.
I love the dragon.
Hold the book up again.
Oh, yes. So I love the dragon, too. Very nice cover art
awesome
on that
dragon.
one.
And that's Saving Data on Android, which is available from Ray Wenderlich Press. It's a great book.
I very much am proud of that book, and the whole team was very knowledgeable. And I had the privilege of getting the files chapter. So I like to begin things at the beginning, and your most simplest way of saving some data, other than shared preferences, would be file storage. So in order to save files in Android, you have to take a few things into consideration because there's different types of storage, and the device ecosphere is so vast. So some devices are going to have external storage, but that's not always guaranteed.
When you say external storage, does that mean like an SD card or like a hard drive plugged into it? Or?
Yeah, I mainly am referring to an SD card, and so first consideration when you need to store a file is the availability. Where am I going to store this file? And so external.
Why am I getting an image of an Android with a 20 terabyte rack attached to it?
That's just the Android world.
Yeah, that's something this developer community might do.
Yeah. That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, see, I'm going to Amazon right now. So, and another consideration is, are these files going to be available to other apps, or is this just a file that's available for the app itself? So your simplest way would be to use the internal storage. And so you can save a file in there, and those are only accessible by the app that stored them, and they'll be removed. when it's uninstalled.
Would we say internal storage? I think this has always kind of confused me because, like, isn't all storage on the phone inside the phone? That's what it makes me think of.
The SD card is inserted into
you put it inside, so it's internal to the phone. That always kind of threw me for a loop.
But it's removable.
Yeah.
And I think
I guess
some devices are like partitioned. So there's internal, external, but it's both on the hard drive, if I understand it.
Feels even more confusing.
Yeah, so and that's the problem with the Android Ecosphere. All these devices are different, and they're all different iterations of Android. So you have to, your first consideration is like, okay, what kind of access do I need? And say we decide, I just want to store a little file with a piece of information for my app only. So I'll do that in internal storage. And that's only going to be accessible by the app that stored them. If I wanted to save to external storage, my first step is I have to see if that external storage is there. Is it
because they could have removed the SD card. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to check if the external storage is there. Oof. Internal storage you can pretty much count on.
I hope so.
Yeah. And I think you can check the availability of disk space and stuff like that too. And
so I would never have thought about the concept of my removable storage is removable, therefore check to see it's. And the worst part is I worked on the desktop platforms. I've worked in the Mac and the Windows world where yes, you have hard drives that can go away. So
yeah.
On a mobile device, I just don't think about that concept of. Here I saved a file, but is the media that I saved that file to still there?
And that used to be, I feel like the ecosystem's been moving away from SD cards a bit, but I could just be focused in on I've had a Pixel 1 for the last million years, so I might just be focused in on my realm. But do a lot of, are the new phones that are coming out, do a lot of them still support external SD cards, or has it kind of been like phasing?
Now my Samsung Galaxy 7 did, and then with my Pixel 4, I don't know if it, I don't think it did because I didn't put one in it. So.
Yeah, I don't think the Pixels have SD cards.
Yeah, so I used to insist on that. So the last phone I had was the Samsung S7, and it definitely does. Because I was picky about that. I hate running out of space.
Yeah. What changed? Why did you stop being picky about it?
I wanted, a lot of that is now writing with Ray Wenderlich and also teaching classes. I want stock Android, and I've wanted a Pixel for a long time. So when I finally dropped my S7, it lived a lot longer than I thought it would. I usually break a phone within 2 years. So that's usually what prompts me for a new one is a nice spider web on the screen. I wanted the Pixel 4 really bad this year, and my provider had a sale, so I was able to get 2 for cheap, and me and my mom both needed phones at the same time.
Nice. Love it. Love it.
I've managed the family cell phone plan. And then one thing neat with the internal storage that I hadn't discovered prior to studying up on this topic, Android Studio has a device file explorer. So there's a little tab down at off to the side that you can expand, and you can just open and look in all the folders to look at the device storage in there. And
that's very cool.
Yeah, it's always saved in like a data folder and then the name of your app package. So you can go and expand that, and you can look at all the device and emulator storage. But it's only going to work on if the device is rooted or if it's a standard emulator, like the AOSP system image. And you have to, of course, have the USB debugging enabled. But that was really neat to be able to write an app to save a file, and then you can just write in Android Studio, expand that tab, and go look for it. You can download it and work with it from there.
Can you delete it? I feel like that could make development flows a lot easier if you can just right-click, delete the file nice and easily. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, and so you can right-click on the file. It's got a synchronize option so that it'll keep the directory. It'll synchronize the directory.
Fancy.
save as, it'll download it onto your, I don't know why you need to download it, but you can save as, and then you can browse to a path and put it on your desktop. So that you don't have to go a million folders deep into your emulator storage path.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
You can also copy the path. So if you want to know where it's at. So that's very helpful. And then it's a lot like any other platform with the internal storage. You can just read, write, delete. You shouldn't need special permissions on the internal storage. You can use cache on the internal. So if you just want to cache a temporary file, you can open a file as a cached file instead. And that way you don't have any control if the system is going to later delete that temporary storage.
Okay, cool. So if you make something a cache file, so if you make something a cache file, you don't have to worry about cleaning it up or deleting it or anything like that?
It'd probably be best practice to clean it up if you don't need it anymore, but the device may clean it out itself. You don't have any control over when it's going to do that.
That's nice.
As long as it's small. Yeah.
That's good.
And so that's nice for just writing a small piece of information. And that is sandboxed with your app. So other apps and the user can't go look at that. So the user can't go look at those files manually without,
interesting.
Device. And that other apps can't access that space. So that's very personal space for the app.
That's another thing that I don't think I ever really internalized about the Android file structure. If you save off a file, if I'm an app developer and I create, like a cached file or something like that, and I save it off, can the user just go through their device manager and find the file, or can other apps see that file, or is it really just mine?
Internal storage, yeah. So on the internal storage, I don't think you could through regular means. So of course with Android,
regular means.
I don't think
special means.
Your file manager won't do it, and like other apps aren't going to be able to get into it. So that's a great place to save a little file specific to the app. And then we come into like external storage. So with external storage, that gets us into, you need a permission for that. And I'll talk a little bit later about the controversy that's been going on, because the way this worked with external storage, that's your shared storage. So you can just request the permission, the write or the read, and then you can write files into the external storage. There's your external app storage. You can read from anywhere in that shared storage, or at least prior to 10 and 11's changes. And in that case, if you had an app if you had an app installed on your external storage, other apps can go read their internal storage.
What?
So
that blows my mind. You could,
crazy?
I don't think I had ever internalized that you can install an app it makes perfect sense, to your SD card. Okay.
And that's on the external storage. So.
And wait, so now every other app can like view the internal.
If I understand correctly, that's how I understood it. I love it. Like, so that kind of exposes the app's internal storage, because all apps that have the permission can read off the external storage, and also they can write wherever. So that has linked itself to, that puts the burden on the developer to not make a mess of the device, not to write files all over the place. Because those are not removed when you uninstall the app, or at least prior changes. And so it was nice because you could have all that freedom, but if developers aren't responsible, it causes security concerns. You can get files all over the device. Yeah. And storage on devices is always a big deal because we're always running low on storage.
So So if you had an app that wrote a bunch of data to external storage, and then the user uninstalled that app because they wrote it to external storage, it wouldn't be cleared? That would just kind of linger?
Yep, but it can linger.
That's a bummer.
Are those files signed or in any way assigned to the app that wrote them out?
Previously, I don't think so. So
they were just random files in a file structure.
Yeah, they could be, and there is a data folder on the external storage that has the app package name, but you don't have to put your files only there. So I think if you put it in the data folder, then it is identifiable that it belongs to the app. But there's nothing to say you have to do that. So you can write in other apps folders. You can write wherever you want. So it starts
in other apps folders. That's amazing.
Well, I'm assuming that when you get your privileges, or when you get your privileges for what you can write, hopefully another app has said, yes, this is my folder. They're not allowed to write in my folder.
And hopefully, I'm not sure if you're able to do that. So it could cause some conflicts and problems. And so the going recommendation was, well, if you're going to write to external storage and it's going to be sensitive, then you need to use some sort of encryption, like some AES or something, so that if it's sensitive in any way, if other apps read it, it's then at least encrypted.
That's interesting. That really kills a lot of my confidence in creating new files. But this is only for external storage, right?
Yeah. So the internal storage does not apply. So the external storage, it's like, well, if you're going to put something sensitive out there, then use some sort of encryption.
Is there a built-in encryption library so that you can basically pump your data through that library?
I'm sure there's several. So there's a tutorial on our Ray Wenderlich site that has using the AES password-based key derivation encryption, and it talks about using that on a file. So there are some built-in tools that make that doable. There's a cipher tool that you can use. It is quite a long process to encrypt the file and decrypt it. But lately, files have gotten a bit more interesting. So in the next edition of the book, we might have to manage, or we might have to update the chapter to include the new recommendations from Google, or what Google's going to now enforce in Android 11.
And what is it that Google is going to be enforcing in Android 11?
Let the drama commence.
Yeah, so scope storage was introduced in Android 10, and they were going to have everyone adopt that. And they got a bit of feedback from the developers.
Feedback?
Yeah. So they ended up getting quite a bit of feedback for that, and they didn't enforce it in 10. But what scope storage is it puts you have to you have an external folder very much like your internal folder, and the apps only have access to that. So you can't just access all the external storage. After Android 11, that will be gone. So you'll have to use scope storage from that point out. And it was to kill the abuse of the read external storage permission. And I believe it was, the Android Dev Summit at 2019. There's a good talk about that. So we can provide that in the show notes. And they said that like 50% of apps were requesting that file permission, but a very small percentage were actually needing it. So they really didn't need that broad of access, but they were requesting the permission.
Now, if you're creating a suite of apps where they need to exchange the data, then that's still possible, right?
It is, and you have to use some built-in means. So if an app wants to expose its data, it can provide like a content provider. So Google Drive is a good example. It provides an interface to where you can select files from it, and it exposes. So an app can choose to expose its data via a provider, and then the consumer app can subscribe to that provider via what are the content URIs.
It's also been a while since I've touched content providers, but if I remember correctly, it's not the most easy to use, simple, fun task to expose all your data that way, right? Or am I making that up?
I would agree. I wrote also a chapter on content provider, and they are a little bit complicated. So they're a little bit like SQL queries. You filter them, and they can feel a little dated now that Room came out because they still use the cursor. So you go through your results with a loop on like the has next method. So people are becoming a little bit allergic to cursors ever since we got Room database, because the tag-based markup is just, in my opinion, I don't know a lot about it, but I sure do like it. And you don't
I agree.
It take very long to just write an app that uses that. And I think another big part of the pushback is you have to use the file access provider that is built in, and they wrote the UI for the picker. So you get the user permissions. The user browses through the file picker to pick a directory or a file. You can no longer write apps that have a custom UI for picking files. You are married to their UX design for that picker. And so
is that going to like kill a ton of file manager apps?
Well, that's a really good question, because the apps that are most affected are like file manager apps and apps that do backup of storage. And they're not going to kill them because what they have right now is there's a link on their documentation. You can get whitelisted in the Play Store. So it's like apps that need SMS permission or call permission.
Yeah.
So through the Play Store, you have to justify why you need that permission. And they've stated that a custom picker is not a good reason. However, a file manager app would be. So you might be able to get whitelisted in the Play Store. Because there is a small percentage of apps that do need a list of any files or directories for a legitimate purpose. And they're looking actively right now, based on the talk and links on their documentation pages, for use cases that they're missing. So they want to know from developers, is there a use case that needs this permission that we're missing? So if your app is destroyed by this, if I were the developer or knew the developer, I would totally try to give them feedback and let them know your use case, see if they'll whitelist you, or it might help them to improve the tools for future apps. And
So I've seen a lot of developers that are really upset, and I haven't really been able to figure out what exactly people are so upset about. Is it that like Google is forcing you to use their UI when you're picking files? Is it that people were sharing files in external storage and they don't want to use content URIs? Or why are people so angry now?
Yeah, is when I was writing the book and doing my research, I looked at the storage access framework, and I noticed a developer community opinion that a lot of people prefer to stay away from that. And so they've made some improvement, but they've made some improvements to kind of make it a little better. One thing was bulk file changing. You couldn't change files in bulk without giving permission to so if someone selected a big group of files and wanted to make the same change to all of them, they'd have to allow permission on every single one. So they've now made a bulk edit, which is nice. So they've made some improvements between version 10 and version 11 of the storage.
So do users have to give apps like permission to access individual files?
They did, and now they can do it a little bit in bulk, but you have to give access. Now the user will be asked permission. Like this app is going to try, this app needs permission now to look at files outside of its little sandbox. There's also a separate permission for like images and stuff if you can have the location data. So if you're going to get the EXIF metadata, you have to request permission for that too. So you couldn't you couldn't write a stalker app like a stalk somebody app. It's like, just watch their photos all the time and look at their location data without getting user permission.
Stalkers Are Us, the app.
Yeah. And I definitely have seen, like, there's definitely some comments on the YouTube talks and stuff from the developer community.
So how many new permissions have they introduced as part of this? It sounds like there's more granular permissions for these location permissions. I assume there's like a bulk edit permission or something like that, but it feels like there's a lot of extra stuff coming through.
There's probably about 3, I think I saw. So one for the location, and then whether you can have the files at all. And I can't remember. There might have been one more. So I can't remember off the top of my head. But 2 or 3. And now and with the bulk permission, it'll list the files in a big list and say, will you allow the app to do to modify all these files? In 10, it would pop them each up individually. So, of course, if you selected a whole bunch of files, and so for deleting it, they have the media, for deleting and editing, they have the media API, but the user will have to give permission to change or delete files from here on out. So you can't have an app that's just going to delete the files. The app is able to copy a file into its own storage and then buy it from there. And they don't want you to do that very often because that, of course, would use up more space. So if you could...
Wait, if you can just copy a file from the external storage, then... So they're not really protecting like the content of the file as much as its presence? Because couldn't you just copy something out from external storage and now you have access to that file, right?
Yeah, and I think the user would have had to give you permission to read it. So you would have been this app is going to access your files, and then it could make copies. So it wouldn't be able to copy it.
That makes sense.
Because right, and it definitely locks it down quite a bit more. And from what I'm reading, I haven't wrote an app on iOS that does files, but it's starting to look more like the iOS file management way of doing things from what I was reading.
Oh, wait, I can participate in this conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking over at
join us.
Does iOS have more secure files?
iOS has always been very sandboxed to keep apps apart. Now, I haven't worked in things like Dropbox or the Files app to find out how you actually go bridging over into other apps, documents. Most of my attention has been more on file format and what I'm actually putting into the document than storing it. Now, I know that the storage has different scopes, whether or not it's document scope or user scope or cloud scope, etc.
One of the reasons why I stayed away from the storage access framework was, one, it wasn't particularly popular all the time, but it has like media providers. So you can look at images, you can look at the videos, you can look at pictures. Those have to be put in their right folders. So you can't put sound files in your photos folder. It'll give you what's called collections of those different types of media. For my book, I wanted to do text files. So one of the changes they made would accommodate me, because now the downloads folder is included as a collection, and you can put stuff like text files, PDFs, documents in there. So before I was like, well, I can't write my app for the book with the file storage access framework because it's only working for like images and those sorts of collections, and I didn't want to work with those. So now if you wanted to do documents, they added a downloads category to that. So that's nice. And you can't select the downloads as a whole. So you can't have the user give access to the entire downloads folder, because a lot of apps now might be putting their external files in there.
Oh, that's interesting.
So the user the user has to go through the picker and select the file that it can have permission to.
Interesting.
Is
so
that
this is going to be a much more granular control for the user over what they want to give that app access to.
It definitely is.
Is that based on app or is that based on file type?
That is based on file type. Or the collections are. So it'll show you all the images or all the sound files that are in the shared space as part of the collection. And it keeps them in the right places. So you can't sit, and you don't need permission to contribute to that. So if I have it, that's one nice thing. If I have an app where I want to save photos, I don't need permission to add it to the photos collection. Now, if I want to edit and delete photos that were not created by my app, that's when I'm going to have to get permission from the user. But you can write if the app writes a photo, it can then edit and delete it if it belongs to the app. And Drew had an interesting question from before. Now they're identifiable, so you can tell which app the files came from.
Okay.
So they did make that very identifiable.
Okay. So it sounds like they're putting in some effort to make sure if you were an app that was writing to external storage your own files, that shouldn't be too disrupted.
Yeah, so that's something you don't really even need to get the permission for, if I understand it correctly. But if you want to edit photos that were pre-existing, it's going to notify the user and ask for the permission.
Interesting.
Are they asking for the permission per photo, or are they saying he's going to want to edit images? Do you have permission to the image collection?
I believe it's to the collection when it comes to images, with the exception being the downloads folder. So there's no way to say, yes, this app can look at every file in the downloads folder. But I think when it's videos or photos or other collections, you can.
All right, so we've talked about internal storage and external storage. Are there any other forms of storage that we've missed at this point?
There's meta storage.
Yeah. Well, you could read the book, but as far as files are concerned, that pretty much sums it up. And with the changes coming, it's getting a little more granular, as Alex said, and a little more exciting. I guess one thing that they mentioned is that people who wrote their apps with C++ are the ones most affected by the change. So they're trying to modify the libraries a bit. That's the third permission. The other permission is that you have to grant permission to get the path of the file. So people who wrote their apps in C++ are kind of dependent on those paths, and they're encouraged to use the Media Store API instead. But there's a little more work involved if you wrote your app that way for porting it into the scope storage.
I'm assuming as opposed to Kotlin.
Yeah, totally. And I've had a student write an app with a button on it in C++, but I've never done it myself. So,
yeah, it sounds a little painful.
It looked painful to me. He managed to get a button on there. It looked very difficult to me.
So you mentioned a few best practices. Are there any other best practices really that we should keep an eye on for this?
One thing that you don't want to do is open and close files repeatedly, because that can slow down your performance. So the slowest part of the file read is when you first open it and do your first read. So it's better just to keep it open for the duration of time that you're going to use it. And if you want to share individual files or app data with other apps, then you can use the file provider API. And so if you want to expose data to other apps, you can use content provider. So those are some best practices. And unless you need external storage, of course, the best practice would be to use internal, and be mindful that all the apps share the space, and the space is limited on the device. So the less is more.
When you open up a file, are you opening read or opening write, or is it just opening?
You specify read or write.
Can you open read write? Or is it only one or the other?
I think you can do both. So
Okay.
you can do read, write, or read, write.
Because it'd just be difficult if you have to keep opening and closing to change from read mode to write mode to read mode to write mode.
Yeah.
Which if you're doing that, you may want to rethink the program you're writing.
Yeah. Yeah, something's gone wrong somewhere higher up the chain there.
That's true. That's true.
What are the I vaguely recall running into a lot of vendor-specific issues when writing files. Do you know if that's still a pain? I mean, it's kind of a pain point across all of Android, but it's been getting better. So I'm wondering if that story has evolved, if you ran into any vendor-specific issues when you were doing it.
I didn't run into that much. I think maybe you would with Device File Explorer if it wasn't standard, but mostly I think the APIs have kind of extrapolated. They're kind of generic from my experience, but I haven't tried a lot on really niche devices. So I personally haven't run into that.
Nice. That's good. That's very good. What about, is there any sort of testing story around files? Like if I wanted to test that my app correctly wrote some file and then read some data from it, is there any sort of like built-in helpers that Google provides or anything like that? Or are you just kind of on your own?
Not that I know of. So I think you're kind of on your own for that.
Fun. This sounds like fun times testing files.
Yeah.
So basically your test algorithm consists of write my file, then read my file, and make sure I wrote what I read.
Pretty much, yeah. You can open it up and look it over or write a program to go through it.
I mean, unit testing wise, it's fairly straightforward. You know, the data that you're going to push in, and and once you know that you're writing, you know you're writing. So
at a certain point, you're kind of just testing that the operating system actually makes a file and persists it. So not the most important thing.
Remember,
I don't know. I don't know if I trust Android to do that.
Remember, you want at least 125% code coverage with your unit tests.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Make sure it does the thing front, forward, and then back again. And then just duplicate the test a few times.
And then unit test your unit tests, so you know.
That's how you get a high number of green tests. Just copy and paste the same test.
Oh, that is too funny.
Jenn, that's really great information about all the file storage information. I am also interested to hear how things are changing, and I assume that with Google I/O this year, they may make more changes or more adaptations to what the policies are and how things are going. It looks like they're moving more and more into sandboxing and a set, simple UX system in there.
Yes. Yeah, so we will see more changes with Android 11 as they enforce that policy from that point forward.
And Alex, you, on the other hand, have been playing with some new technology. You've been playing with KTor.
Yeah.
What exactly is KTor?
Yeah, so KTor is like a web server framework that the IntelliJ team put out when Kotlin first came out. So it's basically their homegrown answer to like, I want to build a server with Kotlin. They provide a framework. And I've been starting to like dip my toes into the server world. Very much dipping like one pinky toe in there. Really.
So what have you done so far?
Yeah, so I've been building a very simple game that has a little WebSocket so that you can communicate with different players within the game. And I've been using KTor to kind of create a couple APIs and then really facilitate that WebSocket. And so far it's been really easy, which is a great testament to the framework. You have your main function, and then you set up a little routing table, and it uses Kotlin's awesome DSL, domain-specific language stuff, so that it just feels like you're kind of writing a little language for your, when my post comes in, I do this. When my get comes in, I do this. Create a new WebSocket with this. And it supports coroutines, and so far it's been pretty seamless. Admittedly, I haven't done super advanced stuff, but I've been pretty happy with it. Yeah.
What's excited you the most about it?
I think the fact that I can do it I took in a previous life I tried to dip my pinky toe into Spring, which is like a Java web framework, and I failed so miserably. It was a spectacular fail. It was impressive even. So with KTor, everything feels very straightforward. Their documentation was quite good. I didn't have any like threading concerns, just the fact that there was a main function that I could look at, and that had some method that looked like start server, and it took in some route. It all felt very straightforward. I think that's what's really been feeling good about it. Yeah.
Where do you think you're going to go next with it? Or have you decided that that's enough for now? Or are you going to try to plumb a little deeper?
I'm definitely going to try to keep going a little bit. So I have an old version of it up on Heroku, which was also a new experience for me. This is all stuff that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole in the past years, and I'm trying to get into that world. I'm hoping to, right now there's no concept of state within the little server I'm making, so there's no like database that it's connected to. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to try to explore that world and see if that's the thing that knocks me over, or if I'll be able to get past that. That's going to be my next step in my KTor adventures.
There's always that learning bump where you hit this line and it's like, okay, I'm absolutely stuck. But once I get through this being absolutely stuck, then I'm going to climb to new plateaus.
Exactly, yeah. I have a feeling that databases are usually where I hit that point of absolutely stuck. So I imagine this might be the spot, but I'll just keep trucking.
Oh, the number of LAMP books that I have in the hopes that one day writing my own
one day it'll stick.
Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP books.
PHP.
Oh, yeah. And that's the old stuff back before any of that was object.
Mm.
I remember that. That's about the time when I was in school.
Jenn, the standard question for you, with all of the stuff that you researched on storage and files and all the changes coming in on 12, you know the question, and that is, we got Google engineers listening. Is there anything you'd personally like to see changed, or is there something that you'd say this has been really great, or just comments that you have that you have there?
Well, I think it's really great that they're listening to the developers in the community and making an effort to collect the feedback and be responsive to that. I am kind of on board with the changes. I don't have any apps that need those file permissions. So I think it's nice to make the sphere a little more secure. So I'm looking forward to the changes. I would like to learn more about the file access framework and the media collections. So I think it's a necessary change, so I could get on board with it. It's hard in the community every time that the security gets a little more tight, because as Android developers, I think one of the things that draws us to it is the wide open possibilities. But in a way, it's necessary to keep the devices from being cluttered, and the most important person with the app is the user. So I guess I'm in favor of it because I think it gives the user better protection, and it informs the user of what their apps are going to have access to a little more clearly. So I'm kind of in favor of the changes, but I do feel bad for developers who will have to rewrite their apps and make heavy changes. That's never fun.
Jenn, thank you so much for your time today. It was great to have you back on the show. You are always a welcome member of the Ray Wenderlich podcast family.
Well, thank you. It's been super fun to see you guys, and I look forward to hearing the rest of season 10.
You can find Jenn on Twitter at jenn.codes. That's JENNDOTCODES. Alex is on Twitter sometimes as Alex Sullivan 444. I am Podcast Dru. That's DRU. Next show, we have another iOS episode. We're going to be pulling in Shai Mishali, and we're going to go back to talking about the new reactive and multitasking framework Combine. Not to be confused with Combine, which we covered last season. That'll be up in 2 weeks from the release of this episode. In the meantime, that wraps things up for episode 2 of this season 10 episode of the Ray Wenderlich podcast. Ray, back to you.
And that's a wrap. Thanks again, everybody, for listening to the RayWenderlich.com podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to leave a rating on iTunes. See you next time.